Black Gold and Bloodshed: The Osage Tragedy, written by David Gran. The Osage Nation, once forcibly removed from their ancestral lands, found themselves atop one of the world's largest oil deposits in the early 20th century. Their land in Oklahoma, previously considered undesirable, became a source of immense wealth. The Osage people, by right of their tribal ownership, became incredibly prosperous, earning royalties from the oil extracted beneath their soil. They built mansions, sent their children to prestigious schools, and lived lives many Americans could only dream of. This newfound wealth, unfortunately, attracted the worst kind of attention. Outsiders, blinded by greed, saw the Osage not as rightful owners of their land, but as obstacles to be removed. Reign of Terror: The Osage Murders. Whispers of strange illnesses and sudden deaths began to plague the Osage community in the early 1920s. At first, these incidents were often dismissed as accidents or natural causes. However, as the body count rose, a chilling pattern emerged. Many victims were wealthy Osage, often those who had recently received large royalty payments. Anna Brown, an Osage woman, was found dead under suspicious circumstances in 1921, shortly after her mother, Lizzie Q, died from what appeared to be poisoning. The family's tragedy didn't end there. Another sister, Minnie, died soon after, and a cousin, Henry Roan, was found murdered. The killings continued, spreading fear and distrust throughout the community. It became clear that someone was targeting the Osage, systematically eliminating them to gain control of their wealth. Web of greed motives behind the murders? The motives behind the Osage murders were a toxic mix of greed, racism, and corruption. White settlers in the area resented the Osage's wealth and viewed them as inferior. They believed the Osage were incapable of managing their own affairs and saw themselves as entitled to the tribe's riches. This sense of entitlement fueled a wave of predatory schemes aimed at seizing control of Osage oil money. Marriages of convenience between white men and Osage women became alarmingly common, often followed by suspicious deaths that left the white husbands with vast fortunes. Local law enforcement, riddled with corruption and influenced by powerful figures involved in the oil boom, turned a blind eye to the escalating violence. The federal government, hesitant to intervene in what was perceived as a local issue, initially did little to protect the Osage. Justice arrives: the FBI's investigation. As the murders continued, public outcry grew, forcing the federal government to act. In 1923, the newly formed Federal Bureau of Investigation, under its ambitious young director J. Edgar Hoover, took over the investigation. The investigation was led by former Texas Ranger Tom White, who, with his team of undercover agents, infiltrated the Osage community, seeking to gain the trust of those terrified to speak out. Their investigation unearthed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of Oklahoma society. William Hale, a prominent rancher and businessman, emerged as the mastermind behind many of the killings. Hale, driven by an insatiable greed for wealth and power, orchestrated the murders of his Osage wife's family members to inherit their oil rights. The investigation exposed a culture of silence and fear that had allowed these crimes to flourish for years. The trial of William Hale and his accomplices captivated the nation, shining a light on the dark underbelly of the oil boom and the brutal consequences of unchecked greed and racism. Although justice was ultimately served, the Osage murders remain a stark reminder of the vulnerability of indigenous communities in the face of exploitation and violence.